So thanks everyone for taking time out of your day to join us today. For those I haven't had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Laura DeVoe and I'm the founder and executive director of Women Who Lead. We have a very timely session this evening, or I guess this afternoon, kind of on the cusp, evidenced by the very high rate of registration on strategies for preventing and managing burnout. This is a topic that I want to say it might have even been up to 2 years ago, I think, that Julia Moore, one of our presenters, sort of mentioned that this was something she had been diving into as a passion project. So it's nice to kind of come full circle to the point where she has evidence-based content to bring to the group alongside her co-founder of the Behavior Elevation Academy, Elizabeth Scarlett. I've heard from quite a few of you that you know, there's interest in this session for a range of reasons. Obviously, COVID has changed the way we work. It's changed the way we live. It has changed the way we connect with others and sort of turned a lot of things upside down. So for those of us with families, life looks a little bit different right now. For those of you that are sort of earlier in your careers, you maybe are experiencing some sort of uncertainties around what sort of COVID means for your career trajectory or the experiences you have now. So rest assured that Julia and Elizabeth kind of have their eye on all of the different contexts and conditions that our attendees are likely bringing to this session, and have designed an hour's worth of content that will help speak to the drivers of burnout and help us all equip ourselves with strategies to prevent and manage it moving forward. So that being said, I will hand over the virtual microphone to Julia and Elizabeth, and we will go from there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Laura, for having us. I feel like I've attended almost every Women Who Lead event with the exception of ones where I had to take care of kids. So it is very, very exciting to get to be on this side of it. So first we want to say a huge, did my slides move forward? Yesterday, I did 12 slides before someone told me the slide did not move forward. So can everyone see a welcome slide? Thumbs up. Awesome. So we want to welcome everyone. And I know that this is a hard time. I have 2 kids. I know that this is a hard time. So we really appreciate that you are pausing, doing this now, taking a moment for yourself, even if you have other things happening in the background. And we recognize and acknowledge that is hard. That is hard for us. That is hard for everyone right now. And so great job by starting to take a moment and think about how you can be addressing this. I'm going to hand it over to Elizabeth to introduce herself.
Hey, thanks, Julia. So my name's Elizabeth Scarlett, and I'm a registered psychotherapist based out of Toronto. And the way I got introduced to burnout was a very personal burnout experience myself. So to give you a little context, a few years ago, I was working full-time in community mental health, which I had been doing for 15 years, but also building a part-time private practice on the side, 2 young children at home and family obligations and a lot going on in my life. And my life is very full and very beautiful, and I had so much to be grateful for. And yet at the same time, I kept taking on more and more in my life. And so it actually got to a point that it was recommended by multiple people in my life that I take some time off of work, which was really unfathomable to me at the time. But I took the words of advice and ended up taking a 14-week mental health leave from work. And during that time, I really started to realize that I was in an experience of burnout and that I didn't really know what that meant. So I really dove into trying to understand what burnout was and what I could do about it. And it required a lot of self-reflection. And the funny thing is, I mean, the first thing everybody says is self-care, but I had the whole list of self-care, right? I was getting my monthly massages and doing yoga and running and all this great stuff on paper. But what I was missing was a particular mindset, that the idea of self-compassion and really paying attention to my own energy and how important it is, and really grounding myself in my values that was missing. And since then, in opening up to other women, I realized that my experience is not at all unique, especially at a certain point in your career. If you've been ambitious and you've had a certain level of success, it's very easy to get to a point where you get to that burnout space. So I'm really delighted to be here today because it was all of those experiences that in conjunction with Julia and kind of going back and forth, which was what was going on in our lives, we realized that the things that were working for us would probably be helpful to other people too. So that's where the Behavior Elevation Academy kind of started, and we're both really passionate and excited about it. So we can't wait to share some of that with you today. So now I'm going to turn it over to Julia to introduce herself.
Awesome. So while this was happening with Elizabeth, I was also in a bit of a life transition. I had 2 kids. I had started a new job. And I think I was looking at the world and trying to figure out how could I continue to have a career that I loved and wanted to be a part of, and find time for my family and potentially time for me, and feel as though it wasn't just all too much, because sometimes it feels as though there's just so many different pieces and it is just too much. And so because I'm a researcher, I'm an implementation scientist by day, kind of a burnout person by night, I went to the research. And so while Elizabeth was experiencing a whole bunch of these things and we were going back and forth, I, on the other hand, was sitting there thinking, what can I research? What does the evidence tell me about these different things? And then Elizabeth, a psychotherapist, is thinking, well, what would I actually tell a client? And so that's really how this all came to be. So in today's session, we are going to focus, first we're going to start with a little activity to get to know a bit about you and what you hope to get from today's session. Then we're going to go into talking a bit about what is burnout. What is it actually? Because I read articles literally every day. There was a New York Times article last night that don't really capture what burnout really is. So we're going to talk about what really is burnout, and then help you do a bit of a self-assessment to figure out, are you on a path to burnout? And then understanding a bit about why does burnout actually happen, and then some ways to address it. And finishing off with another activity. One thing I want to note is there is no way we can cover everything about burnout in 1 hour. So we've tried to kind of come up with some high level key points and then some deep dives into a few key things that you can leave with something really concrete. So our objectives today are really about describing the key components of burnout, identifying where you are on the burnout spectrum, understanding how burnout is related to your values, and picking some strategies that would help you address burnout. So with that, we want to get to know a bit about you and what brought you here today, because Laura shared that a bunch of people even messaged her and said, I really need this right now. So if you could please share in the chat box, maybe your name and what brought you here today. And normally I would tell people share your name and where you work, but I think the whole point is don't share where you work, just share your name, because we know lots of people's experience of burnout is linked to work. So what's your name and what brought you here and what do you hope to gain from today's session? And I want to note that you can write just to panelists if you want, if you feel that you're not prepared to share with everyone. Or if you want to share with everyone, you can do panelists and all attendees, so everyone can see what you're saying. Well, welcome, Genevieve. Just finished your PhD, excellent, and starting a postdoc, very exciting. Oh, and hi, Amanda is in from Northern Ireland. Hello. Ooh. Laura, I really like and appreciate Laura's comment about how she feels like she's constantly giving, sometimes at the expense of giving to herself. Ooh, and Belinda, I like that you're looking for tips for yourself and for team members. And some people looking to overcome the feeling of constant overwhelm, which we are hearing about a lot these days. Oh, I really like Jen. We've been talking a lot about how Jen said that she wants to try to head off burnout before it happens. And Elizabeth and I have been talking about how that's really a key. We're going to tell you this is not a one-time solution. Elizabeth and I, in the past month, have both experienced moments where we were on that path. But when you have strategies, you can get off that path. And so I think that's key. It sounds like lots of people are looking for lots of great tools. Oh, this is amazing. It sounds like there's an entire team that has joined together, which seems really exciting. Elizabeth and I actually, we talk a lot about how oftentimes this might happen in more of a work context where we would come in rather than with individual people. Oh, and Carolyn, excellent question about teasing apart tiredness from burnout. And so we will go right into talking a little bit about that as well. Amazing. So with that, Elizabeth is going to start describing a little bit about what is burnout.
Yes, so if we could go to the next slide, Julia. Really, the research tends to define burnout as a work-related phenomenon, although I think, you know, it's arguable that it doesn't just end at work, right? I mean, we like to talk about things like work-life balance as if they're completely separate. And certainly we're living in a time right now where for a lot of us, it's very much not separate. we might be in the same room where we eat supper as well as where we're working. So while it's a work-related phenomenon and in the strict sense of the definition, I think we can also recognize where are we burning out in areas outside of work as well, and how do areas outside of work impact how we have, what the energy we put into our work. So we go by the 3-spectrum model, and in a couple of minutes, Julia will be showing you the hexagon that we use to define the 3 spectrums. So just very briefly, the 3 spectrums are energy to exhaustion, which is one most of us think about when we think about burnout, cynicism to involvement, and efficacy to inefficacy. So we're going to learn a lot more about these as we go on today, but I just like to point it out that that's the model we're using, and that's what a lot of research is suggesting, looking at those 3 elements when exploring burnout. But ultimately, for most of us, it boils down to our energy. Where is it going? Where are we getting it from? Do we have enough of it for what we want to do? And we have really discovered that that all boils down to relating things back to your values. So knowing what your core values are and figuring out ways to really live by them in your work as much as possible. I think it's also important for us to consider what burnout isn't. I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there about burnout, and the 2 most common ones being that it's about the amount of hours you work or how stressful your job is. But the reality is, people can still experience burnout even if they're not working too many hours. It's a lot about the mindset that you're approaching your work with, or the systems in place that you're working within. Same goes for stress. I mean, I joke about this, but back in high school, I was a housekeeper at a hotel. And I think I had just as much capacity to burn out from that job as I do from working with clients who are actively suicidal. So I don't think it's necessarily about how stressful your job is. It's about what is your mindset toward the work and what are you doing with the stress that comes along. Okay. And the biggest one, and this was a huge learning one for me, and I think what caused me a great deal of denial about my own burnout, is that sometimes we think of burnout as a personal quality. We think of a person as being a burnout, as opposed to actually thinking of it as a state or condition that really almost anyone can be susceptible to or fall into. And I have to say, in reading the research, in talking to people, I unfortunately feel, and we'll be talking about this more in the next slide, that the systems that we're in are really set up in a way that would make so many of us susceptible to burnout. So I think separating it, like thinking of it as something that you're dealing with as opposed to who you are and your identity. So as I said, is this a personal issue? Is this an organizational issue? And the reality is it's a little bit of both, right? Our current work cultures and societal norms, having cell phones all the time, not being able to necessarily shut off from our work has created an environment that's really ripe for burnout. But at the same time, there may be certain personal qualities that would make you more susceptible to burnout. And so being able to kind of strike a balance there and recognize what is it that I'm able to do within the systems that I'm working in to help prevent burnout, but also, is there anything I can do to help support the system so that all of us aren't experiencing burnout? So I loved hearing a whole team of people being here today, because the fact is, if you all have this information, you can start to look for warning signs in each other, and it's all of a sudden not this taboo thing to talk about. Another thing is, if you're working in an environment that might be, have a system, does that mean that that would cause burnout? Does that mean you have to quit your job? And no, not necessarily. I think that that's a very personal thing. And so being able to recognize for yourself, is the job that you're in line with your values? Are you able to still bring your energy to it? Are you carrying a lot of cynicism for the work that you do? Are you finding you're not feeling as productive? There's so many questions to ask yourself. So I don't think simply just quitting your job and trying something else is the solution. Although for some people, when they boil down and do the self-exploration, they realize that maybe they're in a job that's not the right match for them. But it's not as simple as that. So again, as I said, there's need for both individual and systemic change. We're focusing mostly on the individual today, but I think certainly in our discussion, we can talk more about system change as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Elizabeth. And so before I jump into the hexagon, I feel like I'll just add a sentence or two about this individual system, individual and system, and how we know that all of these things have to happen together. But the thing I always tell people in my day job about implementation is, we may want the system to change, but tomorrow you have to work within the system that currently exists. And so if that's the case and you have to go to work in the system that currently exists, you want to make sure that you have tools and resources to set you up to get to be the best version of yourself in this system, so that you can then ultimately change the system. And if you are burnt out today, it is not the day to change the system, So I think we have to start by taking care of ourselves to then go to that next level. So now we're going to jump into talking about the burnout hexagon. And so this looks a little bit more daunting sometimes at the beginning than it really is, but I think it really, really helps disentangle some of the components of burnout. And so the idea is that burnout isn't just one thing. I think a lot of people assume that burnout is kind of like you're either burnt out or you're not burnt out. But really, burnout exists along a spectrum. Actually, it exists along 3 different spectrums. And so you might be experiencing burnout on 1, 2, or 3 of those spectrums. And you might have it at an extreme end, or maybe even just in the middle. And when you can understand how you are doing on each of those spectrums, then you can pick the right strategies to help you overcome burnout. And I think this is so, so important, because if you read articles about burnout, which I've read lots and lots, people kind of default to some of the like go-to things like, oh, you should go get a pedicure or a massage. And like, I don't like pedicures. I don't like them. That's not going to solve my problem. And if I am ultra stressed at work, sitting in a chair for a few minutes while someone paints my toes does not feel like the answer. And maybe that will help someone, but they're experiencing a different kind of burnout than I am. and they have different individual characteristics than I do. And so by recognizing that we all experience burnout differently, then you can figure out what you need to do for yourself to prevent or overcome burnout. So with that in mind, oh, and the other thing actually I like to say is one of my favorite quotes is from Albert Einstein, who talks about how if he had an hour to solve a problem, he would spend 55 minutes trying to understand the problem and 5 minutes coming up with a solution. And I think right now in the burnout world, people are jumping to solutions without understanding the problem. So we're going to start by talking about what is really happening so that then you can jump to the right solutions for you. So if burnout exists on these three spectrums, the first of the three spectrums is the energy to exhaustion spectrum. And this is honestly the spectrum we think about most often when you think of burnout. So I even heard, someone even said, oh, is it tiredness or is it exhaustion or is it burnout, right? And that's kind of what we're thinking of here. This is the emotional element of burnout. So this is that feeling of, oh my goodness, I am just so exhausted, so overwhelmed, I can't take on anything else. This one is often easier to spot, but it can sometimes be easy to ignore because we can be experiencing burnout along this spectrum and think, oh, I'm just tired. If I got a little more sleep or when I get a little more sleep, it'll all get better. When that's not really what's going to happen. And examples of what this might look like, or the things people might be saying when they're experiencing burnout on this spectrum are things like, I'm not just tired, I am drained. Or things like, I feel so overwhelmed that I can't even keep up with my own work. Or maybe they're having trouble falling asleep or staying asleep because they're thinking about work. Or at the moment during the pandemic, I hear this all the time where people are saying, I fall asleep or I try to fall asleep and what's happening in the world just plays out in their head over and over and over again. Or people are saying things like, I don't even have enough energy for tasks. I don't have enough energy for my kids. I don't have enough energy for my family. And I definitely don't have enough energy for me. So that is the energy to exhaustion spectrum. But the second spectrum is about involvement to cynicism. This is the mental element of burnout. And this happens when people start feeling disconnected or kind of negative about things. And this one you might not notice in yourself, but other people might notice it in you, or you may even be able to think about people right now that you can think of who might be experiencing this kind of burnout. And so the kinds of things people might say is, I wonder what the point of my work is. Like, why am I even doing this? Or finding yourself getting angry or irritable at colleagues, or these days, especially at family members or people who are always in your house, especially if that irritability is new and kind of not as rational. Maybe you know that maybe this isn't super rational, but you still feel it. This might also look like things like, I feel detached from the work I'm doing, or people fantasizing about leaving their jobs. So this is what kind of that involvement to cynicism spectrum can look like. And third, we have the efficacy to inefficacy spectrum. This is the behavioral element of burnout. This is honestly the hardest one to understand. And I've read lots and lots and lots, and this one is still difficult for me. So I would say the key words to think about here is, do you feel productive? It's not about being productive. It's about how much you feel productive. And so it is really about this behavioral element. And it's pretty hard to recognize and even to understand. And so you'll see things that land here are things like when people start saying, I feel unproductive even though I am really busy. And I am hearing this a lot these days. People saying they feel less appreciated right now than they have in the past. Or people kind of displaying some of that imposter syndrome. I'm afraid I'll be exposed as a fraud at work, or you're comparing yourself to other people and feeling like you're not measuring up. And we see this so much during the pandemic, where people aren't factoring in people's different circumstances. And so they start comparing themselves and really feeling like they are falling behind. So burnout lives on these three spectrums. And so one thing we're about to jump into doing right now is an activity to help you understand, where do you kind of land on each of these different spectrums? And that is going to help you figure out what you can do to either prevent or possibly overcome any burnout you're experiencing. We are going to use a new feature that some of you may have used, but lots of people I think haven't. You go on right now, on your screen, you should be able to see a button that might say View Options. And if you hover over it, there should be a drop down, and click on the word Annotate. When you do that, a box should show up. And my favorite one is to click on a stamp. And so you can click on a stamp and you can put a little stamp. Or you could draw something. And so I want people can literally start stamping on the screen to see if it is working. Oh, and Laura says, look at the top center of your screen. Perfect. Some people are starting. So I want to see like literally 100 little dots all over the screen. You can do it multiple times as we see people coming in. Perfect. And some people will notice if you use a spotlight like this, it'll show a name. But if you want to be anonymous, I prefer a stamp so that it's more anonymous there. Or some people also like to draw. No option. So some people are saying they don't have an option. Is it only for panelists? Let me see if change. You can't seem to find the options. All right, so if people can't find the options, then on the next screen, what we are going to do is, oh, if you're on your phone, I think it might be hard. On the next screen, what we're gonna do is, okay, I'm gonna clear all drawings. Luckily, everyone can see in the chat box. So what we'll do is people can type numbers into the chat box on our next page. And so Elizabeth is going to go through each of the different example. Oops, sorry, I'm still annotating, clear annotations. Elizabeth is going to go through. Oh, Carolyn can try making everyone a panelist. Do you want to do that? I think I would say it's worth it because it is more fun if everyone gets to annotate and we can just make everyone go off video. Amazing. So if you are now, everyone should try it again and see if you can make it happen. It looks like there's some people who are being switched over. So as you get switched over, see if you can try. Perfect. I'm seeing a few people draw. So you should have a button that says view options and click the annotate. Awesome. I'm seeing more and more. So keep them coming as you guys switch over to being panelists. Thank you so much, guys, for, oh, fabulous. In our I use this all the time, like multiple times a week right now, and I've never got to be one of the people who annotated. So when Elizabeth and I practiced, I annotated, and it was amazingly fun. So a huge thank you to whoever is on the Women Who Lead team who is manually adding every single person to be a panelist. And thank you to all the panelists for keeping on mute and no video. Greatly appreciated. All right, and if anyone, so it looks like lots of people are getting it. There's only 10 more people to come over, so we'll be momentarily and we will get to go through our activity. So I think that everyone can do it. I'm now going to clear all drawings and to move us forward. And so that Elizabeth can jump in to describing the first example.
Okay, so thank you, Rebecca, for getting us all on board with this, because it definitely makes it more fun if you can do it on the screen. So we're going to go back to those examples that Julia had, and I want everybody to use one of the stamps, like the heart or the star, and put where you are on this spectrum. So we're looking at the energy to exhaustion right now. So in terms of where you're falling, just feel free to annotate, put the little stamp on for yourself. Where are you from strongly disagree to agree on this? I'm not just tired, I'm drained. Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of people moving toward that agree place, right? And it's not terribly surprising right now. Although we do have some people closer to disagree, so that's good to see as well. And I want you to kind of that, you know, it makes a difference, time off for sure. So also I want you to kind of mentally note for yourself where you're putting things, or maybe write down for yourself where you're putting things. So this one's under energy to exhaustion. Okay, let's go to the next slide. What about this one? I'm prone to headaches, upset stomach, or muscle aches that I just can't explain otherwise. This one is probably going to be a wider range. Sometimes these symptoms show up more somatically in some people than others. So this is probably going to be a pretty widespread. So just try to note where you're falling on it. Headaches was always a sure sign for me that I had taken on too much. Okay, how about the feeling overwhelmed or like I can't keep up? Something tells me we're going to have some agrees here. For sure. Look at that. So I hope everybody's seeing that what they're experiencing, they're not alone on this one, all right? Let's talk about sleep. We know how important sleep can be. Where are we falling on the sleep spectrum? Is work on the brain? Yeah, is your mind spinning and keeping you from falling asleep or staying asleep? Okay, again, a wide range in terms of if it's showing up in your body or not. That's okay. How about this one? I don't feel I have enough energy for the people or tasks outside of work. Yeah. This often happens when we actually are really passionate about our jobs and we're super ambitious in it and we want to put our all into it, but then what about the rest of our life? Absolutely. Okay, we're moving on to the next spectrum. So kind of to take a mental note as to where you were. Were you closer to a lot of the agrees on the energy to exhaustion? Were you more toward the disagree? Just to kind of keep that mental note for later. Now we're moving into involvement to cynicism. So get your annotations ready because we're going to do some more. I feel detached from the work I'm doing. Okay. Look at that. This one feels like a really wide range to me. Like this feels like we're really covering the spectrum here. And when we talk about values later, I think we might see why. How about, I wonder, what's the point in terms of my work? What am I doing this for? Not surprising that given the last question we had, that this would be a wide range on the spectrum as well. Okay. I find myself feeling angry or irritable with colleagues, and sometimes this could also be with clients, the people we're serving, whether I show it or not. I got to tell you, this one was big for me, sitting in staff meetings and feeling just kind of my blood boil and having some nasty thoughts about people around the table while still having a smile on my face. I don't know if anybody else had that experience or if I'm just confessions here.
I would say based on that response, you were not the only one.
Yeah, I'm thinking so. Nice to have my fellow cynics in the room here. How about the daydreaming about leaving your job? You finding yourself checking out other job postings, maybe a full-on career change? Okay. Clearly some people are feeling very strongly about this one in different directions. Great. And what about becoming increasingly skeptical and unable to trust your colleagues? This could also be with your clients. Kind of just being suspicious, kind of just feeling like I can't trust them to do this. I've got to handle this myself. This can show up in a lot of different ways. Assuming people are trying to make things difficult for you. Okay. Okay, so take a mental note. Where were you on the involvement to cynicism? Kind of file that in your head. And now we're going to move on to efficacy to inefficacy. So this one, again, usually the hardest to define. So really pay attention to where you fall here. I feel unproductive even though I'm really busy. Yeah, thought there might be a lot of agrees here. Yeah. So as Julia said, during COVID, this has really spiked for a lot of people. People feeling like they're actually working more hours, but not getting as much done or feeling mentally cloudy. So this is a big one. What about quick to question the value of the work you do? And this is kind of a broad statement, as most of these are. So the value could mean like, you know, how much value am I bringing by doing all this hard work, or it could be about your own quality of work. Okay. Got some strongly agrees there too. There's been a lot of research about this. I'm feeling less appreciated at work, or maybe I never felt appreciated at work. This is one of those environmental factors at work that can really contribute to burnout. Okay, again, see, we've got a wide range here, and it's really, I really appreciate everybody annotating. It's really neat to see all of those answers pop up.
Yeah. Actually, I feel like, and this illustrates, well, one, a huge shout out to Rebecca for making that happen. I'm so glad. I think that this would not have gone as well without the annotate. And I think that this really illustrates, like to me, this right here illustrates why everyone needs to tailor the way that you deal with burnout differently, because everyone's experience of that burnout is so, so different. And so, yeah, so I just love that.
Okay, here's the imposter syndrome one. I gotta say, with my therapy clients, I am hearing about imposter syndrome all of the time. So do you ever feel like, they're gonna figure out that I don't actually know what I'm doing. I'm gonna be exposed as a fraud. It's gonna happen. Okay. And by the way, about imposter syndrome, you can't actually have imposter syndrome unless you're actually qualified. It's sort of this weird paradox that happens, that if you weren't actually being challenged in your work, then the imposter syndrome wouldn't show up. I mean, sometimes we get in over our heads, but just something to kind of think about. Okay, and this often goes along with imposter syndrome sometimes, but comparing yourself to others, just feeling like, I don't feel like I'm measuring up. Everybody's got this figured out. I think in this world right now where we're having to embrace technology more than ever, I think a lot of people are feeling this in terms of, why does everybody seem to get this? A lot of different ways that can show up. Okay. So I want you to just take a moment and kind of look for yourself. Where do you have what's your biggest strength? What area did you actually have the most disagrees? Yeah, feel free to annotate. Go for it. I want to kind of see where people are landing, because we can really learn from each other on this. So it looks like a lot of people feel quite strong in the efficacy to inefficacy. We've got a few people. I want to hear from the energy exhaustion people later about what you're doing on that point. And we've got, so we've got a pretty good mix here in terms of what people see as their strength. And I think I really want you to pay attention to this, because if this is the area where you have strength, you can use that to support the area that might be more of a challenge for you, or where you might be more kind of in that agree side. Okay. Now, what's your biggest challenge? Which is the one where you were agreeing or strongly agreeing the most? Where's your burnout warning zone? Okay. Again, it's a pretty good mix here. And it's interesting. I wonder if we had done this a year ago, if there would be so many efficacy to inefficacy showing up. I'd be really curious about that. I mean, who knows, but yeah. Okay. So I just want to point out as well that sometimes people say, do I have to have all of these in order to be experiencing burnout? And what I want to say is, like, we're not here to like diagnose burnout for you. We're here to kind of say, here are the things to look out for. So if you're noticing any of these things, maybe you strongly disagreed with everything except one, that's a warning sign for you. That's something to pay attention to and say, what can I do to support myself in this area? So yes, it's possible to have just one area that you're experiencing these symptoms, and that you are experiencing burnout, or maybe you're having a bit of all three. So there's not like this concrete diagnosis about burnout. I just want to point that out.
Awesome. So I am now going to jump us into talking about, why does burnout happen? And I feel like Elizabeth really set this up so beautifully at the beginning, because what we think is often the cause of burnout isn't necessarily the actual cause of burnout. And so many people believe that burnout happens because you have too much to do, not enough time, or you're super stressed. And those things may contribute to burnout, but they don't actually cause burnout. And I feel like I actually have this really I'll jump in to tell you what it does, and then I'll share my last 24 hours related to this. So burnout happens because there is a disconnect between the things that you value most and how you are spending your time. That can be how you're spending your time at work and how you're spending your time at home, or that whole combination. And so burnout isn't just being busy or being tired. It's saying, these are the things you value, and the things you value ultimately bring you more energy. But when you aren't spending most of your days or enough of your days doing those things that you value, then all of a sudden, the likelihood you're going to experience burnout increases. And so when you have a really good understanding of the things that you value most, then all of a sudden it sets you up to be less likely to experience burnout, or to be able to address it when it starts to happen. And so I had this interesting experience. So I just moved out of the city into the countryside a couple weeks ago. And honestly, at the end of the first week of being here, I would say my energy to exhaustion spectrum was pretty horrible. And I stopped. I, in fact, wrote Elizabeth a long rambling email and realized it was because my days became full of doing minute, mundane tasks like emptying boxes, calling, insurance companies, and filling out forms. And those things do not align with my values. My values are things like learning and curiosity and having courage. So It was just so disconnected from what I loved doing. But for me right now, in the past 24 hours, I've had an insanely busy day. I teach an online course on implementation science, and we have all these Australians. So we did an Australian question and answer period from 8 to 9:30 p.m. last night. Then I was invited to attend a WHO meeting to talk about implementation science globally at 8 a.m. this morning. And I sat on the phone on Zoom for 4 straight hours. And then Elizabeth and I were giving this talk. And so from a practical on a piece of paper, this was way busier 24 hours than any other 24 hours since I've moved into my new house 3 weeks ago. But I am more energized right now today than I was that first 2 weeks when I was doing things that did not align with my values. And so once you know what those are, you can shift and transform your days. We do not have time to go through all the values activity here. And so what we have done is we have posted the values activity on our website. And so you can just go in, enter your name, and you can download it. And, oh, hold on, there's a child about to enter my room. Hey, buddy, thank you. And you can go and download it and figure out your own values. And it also isn't really a thing that works super well in large group context because it's pretty personal, figuring out what it is that you truly value. And when you know those things, then it really sets you up well to do some of the stuff that Elizabeth is going to talk about.
Okay, so let's get to preventing and addressing burnout. You're probably like, yeah, it's about time. but first recognizing what it is. And so, there's so much we want to share with you, but given the time, what we've done is we're giving kind of 2 sort of things you can do under each spectrum, and they're not limited to those spectrums, but just if you recognize what are the challenging areas for each of you that these might be a good help. And when I did my values activity, one of my top values was simplicity. So I think you're going to find that coming through in these recommendations, that a lot of it is pretty simple in concept, but being able to apply it to your life, not always an easy thing to do. So a lot of these things are probably going to sound pretty familiar, but really trying to incorporate it and looking at maybe there's something that you can do a little bit differently. So yes. Okay, so for increasing energy. So when I talk to my clients, I separate coping strategies into 3 different categories. And you're going to see each of these under each spectrum. So the first category is distraction. And a lot of people are actually surprised that that's a coping strategy. They're like, I distract myself all the time. I didn't know that was a skill. But it's really about escaping the moment, noticing that we need to kind of step away. And this is really best when our mind is racing, and when we're just feeling stuck and we just need to kind of recharge a little bit. But here's the trick. It's gotta be intentional. So I always I'm gonna tell on myself a little bit. I'm a TV fan. I love TV and I love Cheetos, all right? And so distraction, a healthy kind of distraction for me would be putting on a Netflix show, maybe a half hour to an hour, watching it, eating a small little bowl of Cheetos, right? That's an okay thing for me to do. The kind of distraction we don't want is the binge watching for hours. I just mindlessly watched a show I don't even like, and now I'm covered in Cheeto dust. That is not what we're looking for in distraction. It needs to be intentional, and we need to just distinguish it from those shadow comforts where we're just really trying to escape. It's an intentional escape. Okay, so we don't want to just go into autopilot. We want to say, I'm going to take some time for myself right now. And I think for women especially, this is challenging to give ourselves permission to do that. I don't know if any of you are like me, but let's say I'm eating the Cheetos and watching the Netflix show and writing the grocery list and helping my child with their homework and thinking about what we're going to have for dinner tomorrow. That's not enough. We got to just kind of have a focused distraction. So think about what that is for you. Not everybody's a Netflix and Cheetos kind of gal, so figure out what that is. Another thing to do is think of the energy, think of making an energy and exhaustion map. So almost thinking of it as a line. So just like it's a line on the spectrum here, being able to go, what brings me energy? So what's moving me toward energy? What depletes my energy? And then the tricky ones where it's something that requires an investment of my energy, but's worth it. So exercise is a really good example of that. Going for a workout requires a certain level of energy, but you usually get an energy kickback. Sometimes spending time with certain people in our life takes some energy, but we get an energy kickback. All right. Okay. In terms of boosting involvement, so this is, again, the cynicism to involvement spectrum. So being able to look, how can we soothe ourselves? How can we enjoy the moment more? Okay, so this is really best when we want to unwind. And the way we do this is by focusing on our 5 senses. What would provide me comfort? Okay, now the thing that I really like to point out is when people hear the word soothing, they kind of picture that like bubbling waterfall at a spa and instrumental music and stuff like that, but it doesn't always look like that. You have to recognize, I always like music as an example, because what might be comforting music-wise for me, depending on a particular mood, might not work at another time. And what one person's musical tastes are might not be somebody else's musical taste. So recognizing that, you know what, when I'm angry, when I'm in that really cynical mood, having music with a strong beat actually is soothing to me, whereas some happy song or some classical music might not be as soothing in that moment. So really knowing yourself and what's comfortable for you. Okay. Our second strategy to boost involvement is a writing exercise. And so I have found this was a little trick I discovered many years ago as a way to vent, right? So again, I was that person whose blood was boiling in staff meetings. So if I just needed to kind of unwind after something like that, I would open a blank electronic document, like a word processing document, and change the font to something that I can't read or censor, so like a symbol font. And then I would just type. I would just get out whatever I needed to get out, say whatever I needed to say without censoring myself. And then at the end of that, I got to say, for me, that gives a great sense of relief. I kind of got all that stuff that was in my head and that agitation, and I put it out there. And then you have an option. You can switch the font and look at what you wrote, because maybe you realize that something you said there is something you want to explore in greater depth. But I find if the best way to use this coping strategy is to just close it out, not save it, it's gone. It's kind of the modern day burning the paper sort of situation. So I would really encourage you to try this if you find that you hit that cynicism place, and see if this one works for you. Okay, and in terms of improving efficacy, the coping strategy here is about grounding, finding ways to be in the moment. And the reality is grounding strategies tend to be incredibly simple, because it's when we're really emotionally escalated that we need to ground. So it's just kind of about, I need to bring it down a notch, right? So things like bringing ourselves back into the present, finding ways to just be here in this moment. So grounding works in 2 ways. You can try to establish a practice that keeps you grounded, but also those times when your anxiety or your stress or whatever it is spiking, that you can kind of use those in the moment. So sort of both the proactive and reactive grounding strategies. And this is one of my favorites in terms of improving efficacy. It's about turning the what if into the even if. So this is about shifting one word, but how it can really change how we look at things. So I want you to imagine a young woman, a teenager. She's in high school and she's got this math test coming up. And maybe some of you were this young woman. And she's kind of freaking out. She's, oh my gosh, what'll happen? What if I fail my math test? And then if I fail my math test, I'm going to fail math. And then if I fail math, I'm going to end up dropping out of high school. And then if I drop out of high school, I'll never get a job. And then I'll never meet somebody. And then I'm going to end up dying alone, right? Now, that's a specifically dramatic example why I picked a teenage girl, but that's what the what if thinking gets us. It sends us into this anxiety spiral, and then we tend to get into this catastrophic thinking. So this one event, by turning the what if thinking, it takes us to this like dying alone, math test to dying alone. That's a bit of a leap, right? So just by shifting into an even if way of thinking, it sets you up to be resilient. So if that young woman were to say, well, even if I fail the math test, maybe I could take it over. Maybe I could get extra credit. Maybe my grades in my other classes will bring me up. Because the what if assumes the worst. The even if says, yeah, bad stuff's gonna happen, but I'm probably equipped to handle it, and sets us up to think about that.
Awesome. So thank you so much, Elizabeth. So running through so many different strategies, we are momentarily about to wrap up. And one of the activities, or the activity we're going to end with, is one of my absolute favorite things. So I teach people how to change their behavior. Actually, I teach people how to change other people's behavior as my regular job. And one of the tiniest but most awesome little tools that we know about is, did you know that if you write down, for example, in the chat box, one thing that you plan to do differently tomorrow, there's a 30% increased chance that you're actually going to do it just by typing it into the chat box. So our wrap up today is, we talked about a lot of different things. We talked about the burnout spectrums. We talked about the values and how you need to understand your core values to figure out how to overcome burnout. And we talked about lots of different strategies you can use when you're experiencing different kinds of burnout. But if you boil all of that down to thinking about what is one single thing that you can do differently tomorrow to set yourself up for more success in addressing or overcoming burnout, what is that one single thing? We want you to type it into the chat box, ideally to all attendees, so other people can also see ideas and get ideas from other people. And so just type into the chat box, what is the one single thing that you want to do differently? And I do want to note, I don't know that everyone can see it, but there are many people writing to the panelists that they absolutely love the even if. So that is, I think that's, even if is one of the most powerful things that Elizabeth has taught me over the years. It's pretty amazing. Wow, some really, really, really amazing ones coming in here. Actually, I really like a lot of people talking about intentional distraction, which is pretty exciting. When some people who want to vent into some invisible documents.
Well, and somebody asked a question much earlier about the Pomodoro. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but I actually think the Pomodoro is great because it can be a distraction and a grounding strategy. So it distracts you from what you're doing to get you to do something grounding. So I think that that's actually a great example of something to do. And it doesn't have to be the Pomodoro. It can be little reminders on your phone or setting up little systems for yourself.
So we want to make sure there's lots of time for conversation. If you are looking for more, we have lots of things on our website. We have a free mini course that you can take that really walks you through how to pick your values. And Elizabeth and I are actually really excited. We're gearing up to launch our first ever full online course that starts in October about Beyond Your Burnout and really taking these things to the next level. So you can email us, connect with us on LinkedIn. We're not really anywhere other than LinkedIn or email. And
for burnout prevention reasons.
Yeah, for burnout prevention reasons, we are not on Facebook. We are not on anything else. And then with that, we want to open it up to discussion and conversations about anything. But one of the things that we originally had planned, but we didn't have enough time for, is it would be amazing to hear about other people's strategies on how you can think of addressing exhaustion, cynicism, and inefficacy, because we just came up with a few, but lots of other people will have lots and lots of other ideas, and your ideas might be really valuable for other people. So we thought we could open that up. And I maybe will hand it back to Laura to figure out how you want to do it. Now that you've made everyone a panelist, I don't know how you want to navigate group discussions and conversations.
Thank you to Julia and Elizabeth. I feel like I speak for most people, having followed along the chat, that I had pretty high expectations for this, but you both managed to exceed them. I also keep getting thrown off that when I look at you and the monitor that has my webcam, it's not the same place. So here's my suggestion. Most of you are probably familiar with the raise hand function. And so if you have individual questions that you'd like to sort of pose yourself to Julia and Elizabeth, then let's do that. And I can sort of call on people one by one. And I would encourage you to obviously unmute yourself, but use your video if you'd like to, but fine if you don't. If you have a question you're not comfortable voicing it to the group yourself, then in the chat box, just select my name individually and send me that question, and then I'll reflect that question back to the group. So hopefully with those two strategies, we can sort of cover everybody's question. But what I might do first is repose the general question that Julia and Elizabeth just asked. Does anybody have any additional strategies to share that may sort of speak to the different spectrums? And because the spectrums are relatively new to me, I'll share a strategy, but I don't really know where it fits. So I was joking with Julia when we got on the Zoom call right before we started that I was like, well, I'm wearing my Roots t-shirt, which is how I worked for my computer today. And I debated earlier if I should change it into something that looks more professional for this group. And thought to myself, you know what, I bet you they're all going to realize, you know, the circumstances we're all working in, and tried to do in a way, it's kind of the what if to even if, but there's something for me around noticing when something is an assumption that I might place on other people, and then trying to call out that assumption that lowers my stress level and the expectations I have about a given scenario. So I don't know if that's like a sub bullet of the strategy you mentioned, or if your sort of familiarity with the topic would categorize it as something different. But I find that being honest with myself about whether it's someone else expecting it from me or myself setting that internal expectation, that it helps me prevent getting to a place of burnout.
And if I can just chime in on that, Laura, I think this was a huge one for me in terms of really paying attention to whose expectation is it. And I think that could actually fall under any of the categories of strategies. And I like to think of it as, where can you give yourself permission? Can you give yourself permission to wear a t-shirt to the Zoom call? Can you give yourself permission to enjoy the Netflix show and not actually feel guilty about seeing what Christine is doing on Selling Sunset? Just absorbing yourself in it. It's okay, right? So kind of letting go of some of the guilt and expectation.
I want to chime in that someone just posted something. Lori Dawn just posted something in the box, in the chat box, that said she just realized that she thinks spending time focusing on the issue of burnout is a strategy. And yes, it 100% is. It's interesting. Elizabeth and I have been doing this sort of for 2 years, but really intentionally for a year. And we sort of paused for a moment a couple of months ago when we got super, super busy with other things. And I think that we both started to experience more burnout when we did less work about burnout. And the act of sitting around thinking about it and talking about it and writing to each other about it really can help us think differently, because I think that's the thing to remember. This isn't a one-time situation. You're not going to do these things once and solve a problem. These are practices that you need to learn to embed and do over and over and over again. And sometimes they're easier and sometimes they're going to be harder because of life circumstances, right? The middle of a pandemic, or personal circumstances that are happening also.
So for those of you that might want to raise your hand, if you look to sort of the participant box where there's the chat, and above that you may see panelists and attendees. Sort of in the middle, you should see options that say invite, mute me, or raise hand. If you can't find those, don't worry. Just type into the chat box, just say question, and then I'll call on you because we'll have your name there. I would also be interested in, because I imagine, much like myself, a lot of people are reflecting on everything they've just learned, that if people are willing to share any of those reflections or reactions to things that they've perhaps only considered for the first time, that will likely benefit a lot of people. So there is a question from Amanda. Any tips for returning to work after a period of time off that has helped reduce burnout? So I feel like, Elizabeth, this might be right in your wheelhouse, but obviously happy to hear from both of you.
Well, I'm going to actually tell you what I thought the answer was, and it's wrong as a starting point. I thought the answer was making lots of charts and lists and making promises to myself. And that was actually not the answer. Even though I love a good chart and list, and I'm not gonna, say don't do that. But I had these grand plans about this and this and this. And for me, it was really important to have an accountability buddy and accountability systems. Now, this isn't the case for everybody. Some people don't need that, or some people can set up things for themselves to be accountable. But for me, it was things like I was falling behind in my paperwork, but I noticed that if I was sending my boss a weekly email and telling her where I was at with it, that it was so much easier for me to keep up. Not because I was afraid she was going to yell at me or anything like that, but it just put in that extra layer of accountability. And I also think time management is huge. Giving yourself buffers. How often do we just schedule things back to back, and then you fall behind on one thing and then you're behind the whole day? So really thinking about the time in your day a little bit differently. I don't know, Julia, if you have anything to add there, but those were the things that immediately came to mind for me.
And I would say, having been sort of beside Elizabeth as she returned to work after time off, I would say the other thing is expect that it's going to go up and down. There are going to be days that are going to be awesome, and then there are going to be days that are going to be rough. And I think that we sometimes think, say we had 2 or 3 good days in a row, we think it's always going to be like that, and then we're doubly let down when we have a bad day. But that's not the way it works, right? We're going to go up and down and up and down, and expect it so that when it happens, you're not really disappointed. And so I think that can also be helpful.
I'll add just a small personal strategy that I've used. This is my first week back from maternity leave. And one of the things, it's a little bit of a different break, but I imagine one that many of you have had. I know that we saw a couple comments about people transitioning back to work. To the point that Julia and Elizabeth brought up about values, I've tried to, as I think about that transition back, and even in the early stages of that transition, really be honest with myself about what energizes me and what doesn't. And to the extent that I have control over it, I try to leave the things that don't energize me on the front side of my mat leave, and try to deliberately re-engage with the things that bring me more energy. And that's not something that, I'll get to a point, I'm sure, in a year or 2 years or whatever the timeline is, where some of those things that don't energize me start to pile up. But when you have a break, it may be a natural opportunity to be more intentional in your values-based work. Another question that has come up is kind of the opposite of that, but one I'm sure a lot of people struggle with. Any tips on how to effectively take a vacation?
I'm going to start with this one because Elizabeth is much better than I am at taking breaks and doing hobbies and stuff like that. And I would say, I mean, like, it wouldn't be wrong to say I'm a failure at like taking breaks and hobbies. And so I work very hard to do that. So I would say the first thing is to figure out, so one, if you can align your breaks, vacations or breaks with your values, that is really, really helpful. And so I think that for many, many people, they want to take a classic vacation looks like laying on a beach. And for some people, that is very relaxing. For me, that is not relaxing. And based on the fact that that is your question, I suspect that that is probably not super relaxing for you as well, or re-energizing. And for me, laying on a beach is probably more likely to let me spin in what if scenarios than even if scenarios. And it's not kind of a calming place. So I would say some of the things that can be really helpful is figuring out, so if that's the case, what are things that allow you to actually get energized while on a vacation? Whether it's a full vacation or even just taking a day or an afternoon, it's saying what for you truly energizes you. And so maybe that's going to look very, very different from what a classic vacation looks like for other people. But when you know what that is and you leave that experience with more energy, then you really did take a vacation from work, even if it kind of doesn't look like what other people would expect.
And if I could also just add, not waiting until you need a vacation to take a vacation, because it's one of those things, you ever hear that by the time you feel thirsty, you're dehydrated? By the time you go, I need a vacation, you needed a vacation a while ago. So actually trying to work in breaks, vacations, and if possible, because obviously travel is limiting now, where can you find a mental vacation? Where can you daydream? Where can you kind of just allow yourself to step away? One thing I say to my clients a lot, it's a little bit sassy, but I'm like, do you know that cell phones have an off button? Right? That it's actually possible to turn off your cell phone and give yourself a vacation every evening. And I know that depending on your job, that might not always be possible, but finding opportunities for that, I think is really important. So I'm a big fan of making sure you have regular time off if your work allows that.
So I have a question that I feel like, first I'll read Carly's comment just so that people can, we can close that loop. So for her, she's found that if she can connect with a close friend or family member and pair it with an enjoyable or active activity, then she's even more energized. That's camping or golfing or sitting down or good conversation over a nice meal. That definitely resonates with me. I know when we were opening up this session, a couple of people, I know we had a whole team that joined, but my question to the two of you is, as somebody who manages a team or, somebody who sort of leads a team, what are the things we could perhaps do in addition to noticing the signs that you've outlined that might help create an environment where reaching the point of burnout is less likely?
So the first thing I would say is, and I often tell people, the kind of the flip, like this might be a thing that you would want to tell your manager. So as a manager, these are things that might be really helpful to know. So I think a few things are, one is if you know what your staff's core values are, it can help you know when their work is or isn't aligned, or their days are or aren't aligned with those things. And so if their days are very aligned, then it's going to be less likely that they're kind of on that path to burnout. So when you know what those are, it can really, really help. And so just to give you like a really concrete example. someone's value might be, Elizabeth talks about simplicity. And so for some people, if part of their job is to organize crazy chaotic data that's really, really difficult and it doesn't feel simple, that's probably going to leave them feeling much worse off than other people. But another one might be, I know a lot of people in our space are really want kind of intellectually challenging things. I know for me, that's one of the things I like most, right? Like I want something that's challenging. And so if they feel as though their job is really mundane and kind of repetitive, then they're much more likely to experience burnout, even if they're not actually super busy. And so I think knowing those things for every single person that's on your team is unbelievably valuable. And then I think the other piece is, if you can start to see, if you know now that things like cynicism or people's perception of their productivity are actually signs of burnout, because most of the time we don't realize those are signs of burnout, then it can start having a conversation earlier when those things start happening, and have other team members who can be aware of those things.
Elizabeth, I feel like I want to ask you a follow-up question. Carolyn, we are sometimes the same person. So do you guys have strategies or suggestions on how you approach that conversation with your team? So I have tried, probably mostly unsuccessfully in the past, to sort of be transparent or set up an environment where I hope people are comfortable bringing those things to me. But how do you say, tell me about what you value in a way that's authentic and will sort of, or what energizes you? Just any suggestions you might have on different ways to ask that question so that it reaches different types of individuals.
Well, it's really funny because it's one of those things, it's a word that comes up a lot, but a lot of times when you say, like, what do you value most? What's most important to you? A lot of people scramble to figure out the answer. Like, they'll usually say something like, oh, my family, my friends. I value love. Like I value, these sorts of things. And it's kind of like needing to go a little bit deeper there. So, I mean, our values activity, I don't know if it's always appropriate to do it in a work environment, but being able to share it with somebody and having them get to their values triangle, which is your top 3, really kind of gets it to a place where you're recognizing this is really what matters so much to me. So even if you're able to look at specific work values or work tasks, or what sort of aspects of your job do you get most excited about? And I think one thing that's really sort of a more organic way to do it is you can see when somebody is excited about what they're talking about, the energy feels different, right? So if somebody's like, oh, I just got back from this meeting and it went really well, and I'm really excited about this project, right? As opposed to be like, how'd the meeting go? Well, like just being able to pay attention to that. Like, I noticed an energy shift. I'm sorry, that's a real therapist thing to say. Maybe it's not a manager thing to say, but I noticed a shift in you when you said that. So, can you tell me what's going on there? Or are you able to identify what aspect of that seems to be causing you some hesitation or some dread, right? Like being able to just kind of pay attention to how people are speaking about things can go a long way.
And one little thing to add is sometimes I think acknowledging that someone is doing something that doesn't align with their values. A couple of weeks ago, we were insanely busy at work, and one of my team members was working really hard on truly unpleasant tasks. And I reached out to her at one point and said, hey, I know you're super stressed. One, is there anything I can do to help you? And she wrote back and she's like, no, I just have to get through it. And 2, I was like, okay, I just want to acknowledge, I know that this is absolutely not your favorite thing to do. And once this is done, we are going to find ways to make sure that we maximize how much time you are spending on things that you enjoy more. So that she knows that I know that this is not awesome, but we have a plan in the future and we just have to get through this. Because sometimes, right, like work is work, and sometimes you just got to get through some of those pieces. And I think, and she ended up sending me a message afterwards and was like, hey, thanks for that chat. That was like so helpful as she went into a long stretch of working very hard on a very unpleasant task.
Any other, we probably have time for one or two more questions or reflections, comments. I feel like I'll offer up myself, so I don't offer up Julia and Elizabeth, that if after this session sort of people are reflecting and have questions or anything they want to follow up on, then please send those my way, and I can pass them along to Julia and Elizabeth. I feel like I have just as much to consider personally as I do sort of, I'll say professionally, in the context of creating an environment for other people. But Amanda says a big thank you from her to both of you for creating this work. It's really valuable and she'll be sharing it around. So we will be posting this recording on our website, either for our attendees to view or others to view as well. I do think that sort of paying it forward and sharing the tips and strategies and insights we've all gained is a way that we can not only support each other, but sort of lift each other up, especially in a time where a lot of women are feeling stretched thin and either are feeling burnt out or know that they're rapidly approaching that stage. And it's interesting how across all of the sessions we've had, there's so many parallels. I can think back, Julia, to the very first session we had, and we heard from some of the women that were speaking that it gets really lonely when you're sort of leading at the top, and these aren't often conversations you can have. So for those of you that might be wondering, and I can speak from experience, even if you feel like you're in a position where you don't have a team and you're not sure how to support others, the same strategies that Julia and Elizabeth highlighted can go both ways. So saying to somebody you might perceive as someone who's more senior to you, you know, I don't think that relationship precludes you from being able to say, like, you know, I know this isn't that enjoyable of an activity, but I really appreciate it, or I notice what you're doing, or even just acknowledging that you see when they light up, you know, whatever seems organic to you. I just hope that people can also see that when they have the energy to do so, that there's an opportunity to sort of pay it forward in all directions, if that makes sense. So any closing thoughts or notes from Julia or Elizabeth?
I just want to say a huge thanks to everyone, and thanks for sharing, thanks for posting, well, and thanks for making technology happen so that everyone could annotate, because I think that made it way easier to keep that anonymous. And I hope that everyone took away that even though these are often things that feel isolating and we don't often talk about, but these are in fact not things that are only happening to you. They are happening to lots and lots and lots of women, to lots of people, but especially to lots of women, and especially right now. And I think that there are absolutely ways that you can prevent and overcome burnout, and don't let it take over, because you have choices, even if it feels really difficult.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you. This has been a wonderful discussion, and I hope it's the beginning of a lot of discussions for a lot of people. And I think that, you know, like I said, in my experience with burnout, I was really surprised when I had told my story about burnout, the people in my life that I saw as so together and so just successful, also being able to say, oh, I know exactly what you mean. And so I don't think we can assume that like you kind of get this in your head, like, oh my gosh, everybody has their stuff together and I don't. And when really we're in this together. I'm so sorry for using that cliche, that we are, that this is something that a lot of us can share and experience together and support each other on.
Perfect. Well, to the beginning of what will be many helpful conversations, I'm sure. And our next event on November 27th will be on imposter syndrome, and I think will follow quite nicely from this content. So We'll hopefully see a lot of you there, but until then, stay healthy and take care of yourselves. Have a great evening, everyone.
Well, thanks, everyone.
Thank you.